If you are watching this video, I want you to do something for me before I say another word. Type in the comments below where in this world you are watching this from, because I would like to know that my story has traveled further than my feet ever did. And if you have a spare moment after that, press that like button. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories like mine waiting to be told, and I do not want you to miss the next one. Now sit with me a while. Pour yourself something warm to drink, because what I am about to tell you took me 81 years to live and 41 years to understand. And I am only now, in the last chapter of my own life, ready to say it out loud. My name is Ruth Ann. I was born on a dairy farm in the spring of the year, in a farmhouse with no electric lights and no telephone, in a community where the men wore black hats and the women wore white prayer coverings, and where the world outside our fences was something we heard about but rarely touched. I am Amish. I have been Amish my whole life, and I will die Amish, though what that word means to me now is not quite what it meant to me when I was 19 years old and fell in love with a boy named Eli Fisher at a barn raising on the far side of the county. I was not looking for him. I want you to understand that, because so many of the stories you hear about young love make it sound like the girl was waiting by the window for the boy to come riding up. I was not waiting. I was standing on a ladder with a hammer in my hand, helping the other women pass up shingles to the men on the roof, because my father always said a woman who could swing a hammer was worth two who could not, and I took that as a kind of pride. Eli was up on that roof, sweating through his shirt, laughing at something one of the other boys said, and when he turned to take the shingle from my hand, he looked at me the way a person looks at something they have just realized they have been missing without knowing it. I did not think much of it at the time. Boys looked at girls at barn raisings. That was simply what happened when you put 200 young people together with hammers and pie. But 3 days later, Eli Fisher drove his buggy 11 miles out of his way to bring my father a length of rope he did not actually need. And he stayed for supper. And he stayed for prayers. And when he finally left, my mother looked at me across the table and said, "That boy did not come here for your father's rope." She was right, of course. Mothers usually are. We were married 2 years later, in November, the month when all the weddings happen in our community, after the harvest is in and before the deep cold sets in, when a family has a little breathing room to host 200 guests for a wedding feast. I wore a blue dress I had sewn myself, and Eli wore a black suit that his mother had made. And we stood before the bishop and made promises to each other and to God that I meant with every part of my body. Promises that I kept for 41 years, through 6 children and 4 grandchildren, and one terrible winter that nearly took the farm from us. And I believed, right up until the last week of his life, that I knew this man completely. I believed there was nothing left to learn about Eli Fisher. I was wrong, and the way I found out I was wrong is the reason I am sitting here telling you this story instead of keeping it, as I once thought I would, buried with him in the ground behind the meeting house. But I am getting ahead of myself, and an old woman is allowed to tell a story her own way. So let me start at the beginning, the real beginning, the years before the letter, because you will not understand what that letter did to me unless you understand what kind of man I believed I had married. Eli was the second of 9 children, raised on a farm that had been in his family for 3 generations, out past the covered bridge where the creek runs low in August and floods every spring without fail. His father was a stern man, not unkind, but not soft either. The sort of man who believed that love was shown through work and provision, and rarely through words. Eli grew up different from his father in that one particular way. He was quiet Yes, all the men in our community are taught to be quiet, to let their actions speak. But there was something underneath Eli's quiet that I did not fully understand until much later. It was not shyness. It was not simple humility, though he had plenty of that too. It was something closer to watchfulness, as if some part of him was always standing a little apart from the room, watching the rest of us live our lives, the way a man watches a river he once nearly drowned in. I did not think anything of this when we were young. I thought it was simply how he was made. Some men are talkers, and some men are watchers, and I had married a watcher, and I was, if I am honest with you, glad of it, because I have never in my life had much patience for a man who cannot stop the sound of his own voice. Our first years of marriage were hard the way every young farm couple's years are hard. We had no money to speak of. We lived the first winter in 2 rooms above his parents' summer kitchen, and I remember frost forming on the inside of the window glass, and Eli getting up before dawn to start the stove so that I would not have to dress in the cold. That is the kind of husband he was. He never once, in 41 years, let me wake up cold if there was anything he could do about it. I want you to hold on to that detail, because it matters later, though you will not understand why yet. We had our first child, a daughter we named Miriam, when I was 21, and after her came Samuel, and then twin boys, Levi and Amos, and then a daughter who did not live past her second winter, and I will not speak much of her tonight, because there are some griefs that do not get smaller with age. They only get quieter. And then, 5 years after we lost her, our youngest, a daughter named Sarah, who is the one, if you are wondering, who eventually helped me understand the letter, though I did not know that yet either. On the day it all began. We farmed corn and hay and kept a herd of Holsteins that grew over the years from 12 cows to almost 50, which for our community was a respectable size, not a wealthy man's herd, but not a poor man's either. Eli was known in the district as a hard worker, an honest man, a man other farmers went to when they needed advice about drainage or breeding or the right time to cut hay before a storm. He served 2 terms as a deacon, which in our way of doing things means he was chosen, not by ambition, but by lot, drawn from a hymnal by God's own hand. Or so we believe, and he took that role with a seriousness that sometimes worried me, because a deacon in our community carries the burdens of the whole district on his shoulders, the poor, the sick, the shamed, the grieving. And Eli carried those burdens the way he carried everything, silently and thoroughly, and without complaint. If you had asked me at any point across those 41 years, whether I knew my husband, I would have told you yes, completely, without a single flicker of doubt. I knew the sound of his footsteps on the porch before he opened the door. I knew which hymns made his eyes go soft during Sunday service, and which ones he sang loudest simply because he loved the tune. I knew that he could not eat tomatoes that had been cooked, only raw, and that he always checked on the horses one more time before he came to bed, even on nights when the barn had already been locked up tight for hours. I knew his laugh, which was rare and therefore precious, a short, surprised bark of a sound that always seemed to catch him off guard as much as it caught everyone else. I knew the calluses on his hands and the small white scar above his left eyebrow that he said came from a fence post when he was a boy. I knew him the way you know the walls of the house you have lived in your whole life, so well that you stop seeing them at all. What I did not know, what I would not learn until he was 79 years old and lying in a hospital bed in a room he hated, with tubes in his arms and a look on his face that I had never once seen in 41 years of marriage, a look of fear, real fear, not for his body, but for something else entirely. Was that there was a room in that house of a man that I had never once been let into, a locked room. And on the last week of his life, he finally handed me the key. Before I open that door for you, though, I want to tell you about the last year of Eli's life. Because I think it matters. And because I think some of you watching this may be walking through something similar right now with someone you love. And I want you to know you are not alone in it, whatever else this story turns out to be. Eli's heart began to fail him slowly, the way a fence begins to lean before it finally falls. First, it was just a tiredness that did not match his years of work. A man who had never once in his life needed a nap, suddenly needing to sit down in the middle of the afternoon. Then, it was the swelling in his ankles that would not go down even after a full night's rest. Then it was the trip to the clinic in town, which for a man like Eli was already a kind of surrender, because our people do not run to doctors for every small thing. And by the time Eli finally agreed to go, I think some part of him already knew what the doctor was going to say. Congestive heart failure, the doctor called it, and he used a great many other words after that which I do not remember, because I was watching Eli's face instead of listening to the doctor, and Eli's face did not move at all. He simply nodded, the way he nodded when a neighbor told him the price of feed corn was going up, as if this news too was simply weather to be endured. We did not tell many people at first. That is our way. Suffering in our community is meant to be carried quietly, shared eventually with the church family, but not paraded, not turned into a performance of grief before it is even fully grief yet. So, for the first several months, it was just Eli and me and our children, adjusting our lives around a heart that was slowly giving out. I watched a strong man become a careful man. Eli had spent 60 years lifting hay bales and pulling calves and hauling lumber, and now I watched him have to sit down halfway up the porch steps, catching his breath, embarrassed, waving me away when I tried to help him, saying, "I am fine, Ruthie. I am fine." In a voice that both of us knew was not entirely true. I watched him give up, one by one, the small joys of his days. First it was the milking, which he handed over to our son-in-law without complaint, though I saw how he stood at the barn door some mornings just watching, his hands in his pockets. The way a man watches something he loves slipping slowly out of his reach. Then, it was the driving of the buggy, which frightened me more than anything, because Eli behind the reins of a horse had always seemed to me the most solid, most certain thing in my whole world, and now I was the one holding the reins while he sat beside me, quiet, watching the fields go by. Through all of this, I want you to understand, Eli remained Eli. He was not an angry, sick man. He was not a bitter man. If anything, he grew gentler as his body grew weaker, more prone to reaching for my hand across the supper table for no particular reason, more likely to tell our grandchildren stories he had never told before, funny little stories about his own childhood, about the time he and his brother snuck a raccoon into the schoolhouse, about the horse he had as a boy that would only walk backward when it rained. It was as if, knowing his time was shortening, he wanted to spend what was left of it pouring himself out into all of us, filling us up with pieces of himself before he could no longer give them. But there was one thing he did not pour out. One thing he kept locked away, even as everything else about him seemed to be opening up. And I noticed it. I want you to know that I noticed it, even before I understood what it was. There were moments, more and more of them as his final year went on, when I would look over at Eli and find him somewhere else entirely, his eyes open but seeing something that was not in our kitchen, not in our year, something far away and long ago. I would say his name, and it would take him a moment, sometimes 2 or 3 seconds, to come back to me. And when he did come back, there was always a kind of sorrow behind his eyes that he tried to smile away too quickly. I asked him about it, more than once. I would say, "Eli, where do you go when you look like that?" And he would take my hand, and he would say, "Nowhere, Ruthie, just an old man's mind wandering." And because I trusted him, because I had trusted him for 41 years and had never once had a reason not to, I let it be. I told myself it was simply what happens to a man facing the end of his life, that his mind was reviewing all the rooms of the house before the lights went out for good, and that some of those rooms were bound to be a little dusty, a little sad. I did not know that one of those rooms had a door I had never been shown. I did not know that behind that door was a boy named Amos Zook, and a creek, and a summer afternoon 63 years gone, and a secret so heavy that my husband had carried it silently through 9 children born to other people who loved him, through decades of Sunday sermons about confession and forgiveness that he sat through without ever once standing up to speak his own truth, through a lifetime of being called an honest man by a community that had no idea what honesty had cost him to maintain. I will tell you about Amos Zook. I will tell you everything. Because Eli, in the end, wanted it told. And because I have come to believe, in the years since his passing, that some secrets are not meant to protect the people we love. They are only meant to protect us from the discomfort of being fully known, and that the kindest thing we can do for the people who come after us is to leave the door unlocked. But before I tell you what was behind that door, I need you to understand how the door came to be opened at all. Because it did not happen the way you might expect. It did not happen with a deathbed confession, tears and trembling hands and last words spoken face to face. Eli was not able to give me that. His body failed faster than his courage could catch up to it, and so what he left me instead was a letter, 4 pages, written in a hand that grew shakier with every line, sealed in an envelope with my name on it, and given not to me, but to our daughter Sarah, 3 days before he died, with instructions that I was not to read it until after he was gone. I did not understand at the time why he could not simply tell me himself. I was angry about it, if I am honest with you, in that strange sideways grief anger that comes before you have even lost the person yet. I sat by his hospital bed in those last days, holding his hand, watching him grow weaker, and some small, tired human part of me kept thinking, why won't you just say it? Whatever it is, just say it to my face. I did not know yet what it even was. I only knew there was an it, and that it had been sitting on my husband's chest for 63 years, and that he was choosing even now at the very end to hand it to me on paper instead of in person. I understand it now. I did not understand it then, but I understand it now, and if you stay with me through the rest of this story, I believe you will come to understand it too. Let me tell you about the last 3 days. Eli had been in the hospital for a week by then, in and out of a kind of clarity that the doctors could not fully explain. Moments of complete lucidity, followed by long stretches where he seemed to drift, his eyes half open, his lips moving with words I could not always make out. Our children took turns sitting with him so that I could rest, though I did not rest much, because a woman does not sleep easily when she can feel in her bones that the ground beneath her marriage is about to shift. On the 3rd to last night, it was just Eli and me in the room, the machines humming their quiet mechanical hymn, the hallway outside gone dim and hushed the way hospital hallways do after visiting hour's end. Eli had been quiet for a long time, and I thought he was sleeping, so I nearly did not answer when he said my name. "Ruthie," I'm here, Eli. I need to tell you something." His voice was thin, but there was a clarity in it that had not been there in days. A kind of urgent steadiness, as if some part of him had gathered up all the strength he had left and was spending it on this one sentence. I sat forward. I remember taking his hand in both of mine. "I'm listening." But he did not tell me. Not that night. He opened his mouth, and I watched something move behind his eyes, some enormous weight shifting, and then his face crumpled, not into tears exactly, but into a kind of grief so old and so deep that I had never once seen its like on him in 41 years. And he said, "I can't. Not to your face. I've tried, Ruthie. I have tried for 60 years to say it out loud, and I cannot do it. Forgive me. I will write it. I will write it, and Sarah will give it to you. When I am gone, and you can read my shame without me having to watch your face while you learn it." I did not know what to say. I remember asking him gently if he had hurt someone. If he had done something so terrible that he could not even speak it to the woman who had loved him for 41 years. And he looked at me with such sorrow in his eyes, and he said, "I let someone die, Ruthie. I let someone die, and I have spent my whole life since then trying to earn back a life I never had the right to keep." I did not sleep at all that night. I sat beside his bed until the sun came up, turning that sentence over and over in my mind, trying to imagine what it could mean. What my gentle, careful, generous husband, a deacon of our church, a man who had never in my presence raised his voice or his hand to another living creature, could possibly have done that would carry the word, "Let someone die." He grew weaker over the following 2 days. There were no more confessions, no more half-finished sentences about the past. He seemed, if anything, calmer, as if having decided to write the letter had already begun to lift some small portion of the weight he had carried. He held my hand. He asked about the grandchildren. He asked me to sing to him, an old hymn his mother used to sing. And I sang it, my voice cracking on the high notes, and he smiled. Actually smiled. The fullest smile I had seen on him in months. On the last full day of his life, he asked to see Sarah alone. I do not know exactly what passed between them in that hour, because Sarah has never told me every word of it, and I have never asked her to relive it for my sake. But I know that he gave her the letter then, sealed, with my name written on the front in his own trembling hand, and I know that he made her promise, with the particular solemnity a dying man can summon, for exactly one more request, that she would not let me read it until after the funeral, until after the burial, until, as he put it, she has had time to grieve the man she thought I was, before she has to grieve the man I actually was. He died 2 days later, in the early morning, with all 6 of our living children in the room and me holding his hand. And I will tell you, whatever else this story becomes, that the man who died in that bed died peacefully, died surrounded by love, died having spent his last conscious hours telling each of our children something he wanted them to carry forward. A blessing, a piece of wisdom, a private joke only the 2 of them shared. He died, in every visible way, as a good man dies. I want you to hold on to that too, because it matters for what comes next. We buried Eli 3 days later, in the small cemetery behind our meeting house, in a plain pine box he had built with his own hands 12 years earlier, as is our custom, keeping it stored in the rafters of the barn all that time. A practice some of you watching may find strange, but which I have always found to be its own kind of honesty. A man building the box that will hold him, making his peace with the ground long before the ground is ready for him. Nearly the whole district came. Eli was well loved. I remember standing at the graveside in the cold November wind, thinking that I had never in my life felt so surrounded and so entirely alone at the same time. Sarah gave me the letter 9 days after the funeral. I remember the number because I had been counting, without quite admitting to myself that I was counting, the days since he had told me he had let someone die. 9 days of grieving a man while carrying, underneath the grief, a low, steady hum of dread about who that man might turn out to have been. She came to my house in the evening, after the younger children were in bed, and she sat with me at the kitchen table, the same table where Eli and I had eaten 10,000 suppers together, and she placed the envelope in front of me, and she said, "Ma'am, he made me promise not to read it myself. I don't know what's in it, but he wanted you to know, before you open it, that he loved you more than his own life, every single day, and that nothing in this letter changes that. He said to tell you that first." I sat alone at that table for a long time before I opened it. I want you to understand something about our way of life. We are not a people given to drama or spectacle. We do not, as a rule, expect our lives to contain hidden chapters. We marry young, we build our families, we work our land, we bury our dead, and we trust that we have known the people we have loved as fully as it is given to us to know another human soul. I had believed, right up until that evening, that this was true of my marriage. I had believed I had read every page of Eli Fisher. I unfolded the letter. His handwriting, usually so steady and square, wavered across those 4 pages like a fence line drawn by someone walking uphill in the wind. And I began to read the story my husband had carried alone for 63 years, the story of a summer day when he was 16 years old, and his best friend, Amos Zook, was 17, and the creek behind the Zook family's farm was running high and fast after 3 days of hard rain. I will tell you that story now, in the words Eli left me, the way I have come to understand it after reading that letter more times than I can count, after speaking with people who were there, after making a journey I never expected to make at 79 years old, a journey that this letter set in motion and that changed, as the title of this very video promises you, absolutely everything I thought I knew about the man I had loved for 41 years. But before I go further into that story, I want to pause and ask you again, if you have not already, to leave a comment telling me where in the world you are joining me from tonight, and to press that like button, and if this is your first time hearing my voice, to subscribe, because I have more to tell you, and I would like you to be here for the rest of it. Eli and Amos grew up on neighboring farms. Their fathers had been friends, and their grandfathers before them, so that Eli and Amos were friends almost from the crib, the way boys sometimes are, when their families' lands touch at the fence line, and there is simply no version of childhood that does not include the other boy in it. By all accounts, and I have since spoken to 3 people who remembered them both, Eli and Amos were inseparable. They fished the same creek, sat together at school, stood up together at every barn raising, and were, in the particular language our community uses for such things, closer than most brothers. Amos, from what I have learned, was the bolder of the 2. Eli was already, even as a boy, the watchful one, the careful one, the one who thought twice before he leaped. Amos was the leaper. He was the one who dared the other boys to swim the creek at its widest point, who climbed highest in the silo, who laughed loudest at the singings. Eli loved him for it, the way careful people often love bold people, as if some of that boldness might rub off simply through proximity. On the day in question, a hot afternoon in July, The creek behind the Zook property was running dangerously high, swollen from 3 days of storms, the water the color of coffee with cream, moving fast enough to carry logs downstream like they were nothing at all. Every boy in the district had been told, more than once that week, to stay away from the water until it settled. Amos, being Amos, decided this was exactly the sort of thing worth doing anyway, and he convinced Eli to come along, the way he had convinced Eli to come along on 100 smaller dares before that one. They were not swimming to swim, Eli wrote. Amos had heard that a neighbor's calf had gotten loose and was standing, terrified, on a narrow strip of ground on the far side of the creek, cut off by the rising water, and Amos, being Amos, decided he was going to go get it. Eli begged him not to. He wrote that he remembered begging, remembered the exact words he used, though he did not write them down for me, only that he had used every argument a 16-year-old boy could summon, and Amos had laughed at him, the way 17-year-olds laugh at caution, and had waded in anyway. The current took him almost immediately. Eli wrote that it happened faster than seemed possible. That one moment Amos was wading, laughing, waist deep, and the next he was under, pulled sideways by a current far stronger than either of them had understood from the bank. And that by the time he surfaced again, gasping, 20 feet downstream, the laughter was gone from his face entirely, replaced by something Eli had never seen on his friend before. Fear, Eli ran along the bank, he wrote, trying to keep pace, trying to think of what to do. And there was a fallen tree a little further down, its branches trailing in the water. And Eli reached it just as Amos was swept toward it. And Amos's hand closed around a branch. And for one moment, one single suspended moment, Eli believed his friend was saved. And then Eli wrote, and this is the part of the letter where his handwriting grows so unsteady I can barely read it even now. I stood on that bank, Ruthie, not 10 feet from him, and I did not go in. I told myself the current was too strong, that I would only drown alongside him, that I should run for help instead, and some of that may even have been true. But the truth underneath the truth I have never said out loud to a living soul until this letter, is that I was afraid. I was 16 years old, and I was more afraid of dying than I was brave enough to try to save my best friend. And I stood on that bank frozen. For what felt like an hour, but the coroner later told my father could not have been more than 30 or 40 seconds. And in those 30 or 40 seconds, the branch broke, or his hand slipped. I have never been sure which. And the current took him, and I did not see him again until 3 days later, when they found his body 2 miles downstream, caught against the pilings of the old mill bridge. I sat at my kitchen table with that page in my hands, Ruthie's own hands, my hands, shaking, and I want to tell you that my first feeling was not judgment. I have thought about this many times since, wondering what it says about me. But my first feeling reading those words was not anger at my husband, not disgust, not even shock exactly. My first feeling was a kind of unbearable tenderness, imagining a 16-year-old boy standing on a creek bank, frozen by a fear that every human body is built to feel, watching the worst thing that would ever happen to him unfold 10 feet away, close enough to reach out and touch, and yet somehow in that terrible suspended moment, impossibly far. But I want to be honest with you, because Eli was finally honest with me, and I owe him the same courtesy in telling his story. My tenderness did not stay simple for long, because the letter did not end there. If it had ended there, with a confession of one frightened, frozen moment in a boy's life, I think I could have folded that page up, held my husband a little tighter in my memory, and let the whole matter rest as a private, sorrowful thing between him and God. But there was more. There was the 63 years that came after. Eli wrote that the district, at the time, understood what had happened as a tragic accident. Plain and simple. 2 boys who should have known better. A creek too high. A boy too bold. A friend who ran for help, but arrived too late. That was the story that was told at Amos's funeral. That was the story that was told for decades afterward, whenever anyone spoke of the Zook boy who drowned in the summer of his 17th year. Nobody, not Amos's parents, not the bishop, not Eli's own father, ever knew that Eli had been standing close enough to try, or that there had been a window, however brief, however nearly impossible, in which a different choice might have saved a life. Eli let that story stand. He was 16 years old, terrified, grieving, and I do not think, reading his words, that he set out deliberately to deceive anyone in those first weeks. I think he simply could not bring himself to correct a version of events that spared him a truth he could barely survive knowing himself. But as the weeks became months, and the months became years, the silence hardened into something else. It became, in his words, the architecture of my whole life. Every kindness I ever did, he wrote. Every hour I ever gave to this church. Every stranger I ever helped without being asked. All of it, Ruthie, was built on top of that 30 seconds on the creek bank. I did not become a good man because goodness came naturally to me. I became a good man because I was trying, every single day for 63 years, to build something large enough to bury what I had done, or failed to do, that afternoon. He wrote about Amos's mother, a woman named Fanny Zook, who had lived, according to his letter, into her 90s, dying only 4 years before Eli himself, having spent her whole long widowed life believing that her son's death was a pure accident, an act of God and rushing water, nothing more. Eli wrote that in the decades after Amos's death, he had made it a quiet, secret practice, known to no one, not even to me, of helping the Zook family in small anonymous ways whenever he was able. When their barn burned in a lightning strike some 20 years into our marriage, and the community took up a collection to help rebuild, Eli had given far more than his fair share, slipping extra funds into the collection envelope without anyone, including me, ever knowing the true amount. When Fanny Zook's husband died and left her with debts on the farm, Eli had, through a sympathetic Mennonite lawyer 2 counties over, quietly paid down a portion of that debt in a way that was never traced back to him. Every single one of these acts, I now understood, reading that letter, had been Eli's private, silent penance, offered to a family who never knew they were receiving it, for a debt he believed he owed and could never fully repay. But here was the part of the letter that I believe he needed to write most, the part his hand shook hardest to form, the words crowded close together near the bottom of the 4th page, as if he had been racing his own failing strength to get them down. Fanny Zook had a granddaughter, Amos's grandniece, really, a woman named Katie Zook, who still lived, so far as Eli knew, on a portion of the old Zook property, having married a man from a neighboring district and stayed close to her family's land her whole life. Eli wrote that in the last several years, as his own health had begun to fail, he had become consumed by a fear that he would die, and this last truth would die with him, that the story of Amos Zook's death would remain forever the story of an accident, a boy and a flood, when in fact it was also, quietly, the story of a boy who might have been saved, and a friend who had spent his whole life trying to be worthy of a rescue he had failed to attempt. I need someone to know the truth. Ruthie, he wrote, before I go. I have tried for 63 years to tell it myself, and my courage has failed me every single time, the same as it failed me on that creek bank. I am asking you, my dear wife, the only person I have ever fully trusted in this world, to do the one thing I could never do. Find Katie Zook. Tell her what really happened to her family's boy. Let her decide what to do with the truth. I do not deserve to be forgiven for my silence, but I cannot die and leave this world without at least giving someone the choice. That was where the letter ended. Not with an apology to me, though there were apologies scattered throughout it. Not with a declaration of love, though I knew, and know still, that he loved me completely. It ended with a request, a final task, handed to me from beyond the grave, the last thing my husband of 41 years would ever ask of me. I want to tell you honestly what I felt in the days after I read that letter, because I do not think it would be truthful of me to tell you I felt only compassion, only understanding. I felt those things, yes, in time, but in the first days I also felt something closer to grief, laid on top of grief. A strange doubled mourning, because I was not only mourning the man I had buried, I was mourning the version of him I had believed I knew, a version that had, in some sense, never fully existed. I found myself walking through our house, looking at the ordinary objects of our life together. His reading glasses on the windowsill, his boots still lined up by the door, and wondering how many other rooms there might be that I had never been shown. I did not think there were more. I came, over time, to believe this was the only locked door in the whole house of him. But in those first raw days, I did not yet know that, and the not knowing was its own kind of grief. I also felt, and I am ashamed to admit this, but I promised myself I would tell this story honestly, or not tell it at all. A flicker of something like anger, not at the frightened 16-year-old boy on the creek bank. I could never be angry at him. But at the man, the grown man, the husband I had trusted completely, who had carried this alone for 4 decades of our marriage, who had let me believe I knew the whole of him when in fact there was a door he had never once let me touch. I sat with that anger for a while. I did not push it away, because I have lived long enough to know that grief handled honestly moves through you faster than grief you try to skip past. And eventually, the anger settled, not because it was wrong, but because underneath it, when I let myself look, was an understanding so large it swallowed the anger whole. He was 16 years old. He watched his best friend die in front of him, and then he had to keep living, in a community small enough that he would pass Fanny Zook at market, at church, at funerals and weddings for the next 60 years, carrying a truth he believed, rightly or wrongly, would break her heart a second time if she ever learned it, and would break the community's trust in him if they knew he had let a false story stand uncorrected for so long. I do not say this to excuse him. I have thought long and hard, in the years since, about whether he should have told the truth sooner, told Fanny Zook while she was still alive to hear it, and I confess I do not have a clean answer to that question. I only know that a boy who is drowning in guilt does not always make the choices that a grown, healed man might wish he had made, and that Eli spent his whole life, in his own broken, silent way, trying to be worthy of a truth he could not bring himself to speak. I sat with that letter for 2 full weeks before I did anything at all. I told no one but Sarah, who already knew there was something in it, though not what. I did not tell my other children yet. I needed, I think, to walk around inside this new understanding of my husband by myself first, the way you walk slowly around a house you have just been told you now own, touching the walls, opening drawers, before you can decide how you want to live in it. And then, on a cold morning in early December, a month after Eli's funeral, I hitched up the buggy myself, something I had not done alone in years, and I drove out past the covered bridge, past the creek that I now understood in an entirely different way, toward the old Zook property, to find a woman named Katie Zook that I had never met, to deliver a truth that was not mine to keep, and not mine to give away lightly either. If you are still with me, if this story is touching something in you, I want to ask you again to type in the comments where you are watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it means more to me than you know, to picture all the different corners of the world where my Eli's story is finally being heard. And if you have not yet liked this video, or subscribed to hear the rest of what happened when I knocked on Katie Zook's door, please do that now. Because what came next surprised me even more than the letter itself. The Zook farm sat exactly where Eli's letter had described it. A neat white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a big red barn behind it, and beyond that, visible from the lane, the creek, smaller now in December, its banks quiet under a skin of thin ice, giving no hint at all of the violence it was capable of in a summer storm. I sat in my buggy at the end of that lane for a long time before I found the courage to drive up to the house. I want to tell you, plainly, that I was more frightened in that moment than I had been at almost any other point in my life. More frightened in some ways than I had been standing at Eli's graveside. Because grief, terrible as it is at least a road we all know how to walk. I did not know what road I was on that morning. I did not know if I was about to give a stranger a gift or a wound. Katie Zook turned out to be a woman of about 60, with her grandmother's same wide, kind face, which I recognized only because Eli had, in earlier years, once shown me an old photograph of Fanny Zook at a community gathering. A photograph I had not thought about in years until that morning. When Katie opened her door, and I saw in her face the echo of a woman I had glimpsed only once in a faded picture. She did not know me well, though our families had crossed paths at church functions and funerals over the decades, in the distant way that everyone in a small district crosses paths. She knew, of course, of Eli's passing. Word travels fast and full of sorrow in our community. She invited me in without hesitation, the way our people do, put on a pot of coffee, and asked, kindly, what had brought me out on such a cold morning. I did not know how to begin. I had rehearsed it a dozen times on the drive over, and every version of it had abandoned me the moment I sat down at her table. In the end, I simply took Eli's letter out of my coat pocket, and I told her the truth, plainly, the way Eli himself had never quite managed to. I told her that my husband had carried a secret his whole life, about the day her great-uncle Amish died, and that he had asked me, in his last letter, to bring that secret to her family, and that I did not know what it would mean to her, but that I owed it to my husband, and I believed I owed it to her too, to tell her rather than let it die with me the way it had almost died with him. I watched her face as she read the letter. I have thought about her face many times since, the way it moved through disbelief, and then a kind of stunned stillness, and then, near the end, tears that she did not try to hide from me. A woman she had met only 20 minutes before. When she finished, she sat for a long moment without speaking, the letter resting on the table between us like something alive. And then she said something I did not expect. Something that has stayed with me every single day since. Something that I believe changed the way I understood not only my husband's secret, but grief itself, and forgiveness itself, and the whole strange architecture of how human beings carry the things that happen to them. She said, "My grandmother knew someone was close to Amish that day." I did not understand at first. I asked her what she meant, and she explained, slowly, choosing her words with care, that her grandmother, Fanny Zook, had never believed the official story completely. Not because she suspected any wrongdoing, but because a mother's instinct, she said, does not always accept the tidy version of things. Fanny had told Katie, many years before her death, that she had always sensed there was more to that day than what was told at the funeral. That Eli Fisher, in the years afterward, had a particular sorrow about him whenever Amish's name came up. A sorrow that seemed, to Fanny's eyes, larger than simple friendship grief. But Fanny had never pressed the matter. She told Katie once, near the end of her own life, that she had made a decision, long ago, not to go looking for a wound that might be worse than the one she already carried. She said, and Katie repeated this to me with tears in her eyes, "Sometimes a mother chooses not to ask a question because she is not sure she can survive every possible answer." Katie told me that her grandmother had, in fact, quietly suspected for decades that Eli Fisher had been the source of a great deal of unexplained kindness toward her family over the years. The barn rebuilding, the debt relief after her husband's death, small things too, gifts of meat during hard winters, help with repairs that arrived and departed without explanation. Fanny had never known for certain it was Eli, but she had, Katie said, come to a kind of peace with the mystery of it. She used to say, according to Katie, "Someone out there is trying to carry a piece of my grief for me, and I have decided to let them." I sat in that kitchen, and I wept. Ruthie the widow and Ruthie the wife, both weeping together. Because I understood, in that moment, that my husband's 63 years of silent penance had not been entirely wasted, had not been entirely a secret kept in vain. Some part of it, some warmth of it, had reached the very family he believed he had failed, even without his name ever being spoken. Fanny Zook had died 4 years before Eli, having felt, in her own words as passed to me by her granddaughter, cared for by an unseen hand she chose not to unmask. She had, in her own way, already extended a kind of forgiveness to a man she never confirmed needed it, simply by deciding, again and again across the decades, to receive his kindness without demanding his confession. Katie and I sat together in that kitchen for 3 hours that morning. She asked me questions about Eli, about our marriage, about the man he had become, and I found myself, strangely, telling her some of the same stories I have told you tonight. The frost on the window in our first winter, the way he never let me wake up cold, the laugh he saved for only the truest surprises. And she told me stories about Amish, the boy she had never met but had grown up hearing about, the boy who dared his friends to swim wide creeks and climb high silos, the boy whose memory had shaped her whole family's understanding of boldness and grief and the terrible, unpredictable speed of a summer storm. Before I left that day, Katie took my hands across her kitchen table, and she said something I want to leave with you now, because I believe it is the true heart of this whole long story I have told you tonight. She said, "Ruth, your husband spent 63 years punishing himself for 30 seconds of fear on a creek bank. My grandmother spent 63 years choosing, again and again, not to need an explanation for the kindness that came her way. I think, between the two of them, they already found a kind of peace neither one of them knew the other was reaching toward. You have not brought me a wound today. You have brought me the last missing piece of a puzzle my family has been quietly assembling, without complaint, for longer than either of us has been alive. Thank you for finishing it." I drove home that afternoon in the deep December cold, my breath fogging in front of me, the letter tucked safely back into my coat pocket, and I felt something shift inside my chest that I have never fully been able to put into words, though I have tried many times in the years since. Sitting with my grandchildren, sitting alone in my kitchen at night, and I am trying to put it into words for you now. I felt the anger I had been carrying since I first read that letter finally, fully, release, not because the facts had changed. Eli had still stood frozen on that creek bank. Amos had still died. 63 years of silence had still passed between my husband and a truth that might have brought Fanny Zook a different kind of comfort had it been spoken sooner. None of that changed. What changed was my understanding of what a good life actually is. I had spent 41 years believing that I had married a naturally good man, a man for whom kindness came as easily as breathing, and I grieved, in those first weeks after the letter, the loss of that simple belief. But driving home from Katie Zook's kitchen that afternoon, I began to understand that I had not lost anything true at all. I had only lost an illusion, and in its place, I had gained something far more precious and far more real. I had married a man who was not naturally good, who was, underneath everything, a frightened boy, who had failed the single most important test of his young life, and who had spent every single day afterward, 63 years of days, choosing, over and over and over again, to try to become the man he wished he had been on that creek bank. That is not a lesser story than the one I thought I knew. It is, I have come to believe, a far greater one. Goodness that comes easily is a gift. Goodness that is built, brick by brick, out of the wreckage of your own worst moment, sustained for 63 years without a single person ever knowing the cost of it. That is not a gift. That is a kind of heroism our community rarely has a word for. Because we are taught to be humble, to let our actions speak, and Eli's actions spoke so quietly for so long that even his own wife did not hear the full sentence until he was gone. I told our children everything, eventually, gathered around this same kitchen table where I am sitting even now as I speak these words to you. I told them slowly, over the course of an evening, the story of the creek, the letter, the drive to Katie Zook's farm. I watched their faces move through the same journey mine had moved through. Disbelief, sorrow, and finally, something like a fierce, tender pride. A pride not in spite of their father's failure, but because of what he had built on top of it. My son Samuel said something that night that I have carried with me ever since. He said, "Ma'am, I always thought Daid was the strongest man I knew because nothing seemed to shake him. Now I understand he was the strongest man I knew because everything shook him, every single day, and he never once let us see the ground move under his feet." I think that is as true and as beautiful a thing as has ever been said about my husband. And I did not think of it myself. My son did. Standing in the kitchen where his father used to sit every night. A kitchen that will always, for me, hold both the man I thought I married and the fuller, harder, more human man I came to understand only after he was gone. I want to tell you what I have done with this story in the years since, because I think it matters, and because I think it might matter to some of you watching. Whatever secrets you may be carrying yourself, whatever letters you may be waiting to write or waiting to receive. I did not keep Eli's secret locked away the way he had kept it. I made a decision, sitting in my kitchen in the winter after his death. That silence had already cost my husband 63 years of a peace he might have found sooner. and I was not willing to let that same silence cost our family, or our community, the chance to understand what real goodness actually costs. I began, slowly, carefully, with the blessing of our bishop, who himself wept when I told him the story to speak of it, first to our own children, then to a few trusted friends in the church, and eventually, as the years passed and my own courage grew the way I believe Eli's courage might have grown had he lived longer, to a wider circle still, until finally, at 81 years old, sitting in this chair, I have decided to tell it to all of you. I do not tell it to shame my husband. I hope, if you have listened this far, you understand that shame is the very last thing this story is meant to carry. I tell it because I believe there are people watching this video tonight who are carrying their own creek bank, their own 30 frozen seconds, their own decades of silent penance for a moment they cannot undo. And I want you to hear from an old woman who has now lived on both sides of a secret like that, both the side that carries it and the side that receives it, that the weight of it does not have to be carried alone forever. Fanny Zook found her own quiet peace without ever needing the confession spoken aloud. Katie Zook found not a wound, but a gift in finally hearing the whole truth. And I, Ruth Ann Fisher, found that I did not love my husband less for learning the truth about him. I found that I loved him more completely. Because for the first time in 41 years of marriage, I was permitted to love the whole man, not just the parts he believed was safe to show me. I visit Katie Zook still. From time to time, when the roads allow it, we have become, in these last years, unlikely friends. Two old women bound together by a boy who drowned before either of our own mothers were born, by a summer storm 63 years past, by a letter written in a shaking hand in a hospital room neither of us was in. Last spring, we walked down to the creek together. The same creek, quiet and shallow in the June sunshine, giving no hint of what it had once taken from her family or what it had once demanded and failed to receive from a frightened 16-year-old boy. We stood on that bank together for a long while, not saying much, and then Katie said, "I think they've both found their peace by now, don't you? Amos and Eli both." And I said, "I believe they have. And I believe it still." I want to go back now and tell you some things I skipped over. Because when I first sat down to record this, I told myself I would tell you only the necessary parts, the parts that carry the story forward. But the longer I have sat here talking to you, the more I have realized that the necessary parts and the true parts are not always the same thing. And I think you deserve the true parts. All of them. Even the slow ones. Even the ones that do not move the story forward so much as they widen it. Let me tell you more about our courtship, because I think it matters for understanding what kind of promise I made to Eli, and what kind of promise he was, in his own broken way, trying to keep to me for 63 years, even before we had ever met. When Eli came to my father's farm with that length of rope he did not need, I was not an easy girl to court. I want you to know that. I had turned down 2 other young men in the 2 years before Eli started driving out to see me. Not because there was anything wrong with either of them, but because I had watched my older sister marry in haste. Marry a boy because he was pleasant and available, and because our mother worried she would be left an old maid, and I had watched that marriage settle, over the years, into something comfortable but thin, like broth stretched too many times with water. And I had promised myself, quietly, that I would rather stay unmarried my whole life than settle for thin broth. Eli was not thin broth. From the very first evening he stayed for supper, I noticed something about the way he listened. Most young men, when they came courting, spent the whole evening trying to be noticed, trying to make themselves interesting, filling the silences with talk of their farms, their prospects, their opinions on this preacher or that one. Eli did the opposite. He asked my father questions about drainage and let my father talk for 20 minutes without once trying to steer the conversation back to himself. He asked my mother about her garden and actually listened to the answer, the way you listen when you intend to remember it, not the way you listen while waiting for your turn to speak. And when he finally did turn his attention to me, near the end of the evening, he did not ask me what I liked to do, the way most boys did. He asked me what I was afraid of. I remember being so startled by the question that I very nearly did not answer it. No one had ever asked me that before. Not my parents, not my sisters, not the 2 boys who had courted me before him. I told him, after a long pause, that I was afraid of being married to a man I could not surprise, a man who thought he had me fully figured out before the wedding even happened. Eli nodded slowly, the way he nodded at everything, turning a thing over in his mind before he answered it, and he said, "I think I would like to spend a whole lifetime being surprised by you. If you would let me," I did not know, sitting at that table as a 19-year-old girl, how strange and how true that sentence would turn out to be, though not in the direction either of us imagined. I spent 41 years being surprised by small, delightful things about Eli, and then, in the final week of his life, I was surprised by the largest thing of all. I think, looking back now, that Eli's question that first evening was not entirely innocent. I do not mean that unkindly. I do not think he was testing me, or setting some kind of trap, but I have come to believe, especially in these last years since I read his letter, that a boy who has spent 3 years since a tragedy learning to hide a truth from an entire community does not ask a girl what she is afraid of by accident. I think some part of him, even at 18, already understood fear as the central fact of his own life, the hinge on which everything else turned. And I think, without either of us knowing it yet, he was already looking for a woman who would not run from him if she ever learned the size of what he was afraid of. We were engaged within the year, and married the November after that, and I have already told you some of what those early years were like. The cold apartment above his parents' summer kitchen, the frost on the window, the slow building of our family and our farm. But I want to tell you a few more specific memories now, because I think they matter. Small true things that I did not fully appreciate until I understood, after the letter, what they had cost him to give. I remember, in the 3rd year of our marriage, a terrible summer, when the corn nearly failed entirely from lack of rain, and Eli worked from before dawn until after dark trying to save what he could of it, hauling water by hand to the rows nearest the house. And I remember one evening finding him sitting alone on the porch steps after the children were in bed, staring out at the wilting fields. And I sat down beside him and asked him what he was thinking. And he said, very quietly, "I am thinking that a man is not owed anything in this life, Ruthie. Not rain, not a harvest, not even tomorrow. Every good thing that comes is a gift I did not earn, and I try to remember that, so that when the gifts stop coming, I do not feel cheated." At the time, I thought this was simply Eli's particular flavor of faith, a farmer's philosophical acceptance of weather and fortune. I understand now that it was something much more specific and much more personal. He did not believe he was owed anything, because some part of him believed every single day of his life that he had already been given more than he deserved, that his own continued living, his own health, his own family, his own harvest, all of it was undeserved grace handed to a boy who had failed the one test that should have defined him. And every subsequent gift only deepened the debt he believed he owed. I remember, too, the year our youngest daughter Sarah was born, a difficult birth that left me weak for weeks afterward. And Eli, who had never in his life so much as boiled water for tea, taught himself to cook simple meals so that I would not have to rise from bed before I was ready. And I remember him sitting beside me one night, exhausted from a full day of farm work followed by a full evening of trying to manage 5 other children and a newborn, and I asked him why he did not simply ask his mother or one of the other church women to come help, the way most husbands would have. And he said, "Because you have carried enough for this family without complaint, Ruthie, and it is my turn to carry something now, even if I carry it clumsily." I did not think much of this at the time beyond simple gratitude for a good husband. I understand it differently now. I understand that Eli measured his own worth, silently, against a scale only he could see. A scale that always seemed to be asking him whether he had done enough yet. Whether this particular act of carrying was sufficient to balance whatever he believed he still owed. I do not tell you these memories to suggest that Eli's whole marriage to me was some elaborate performance of penance, some grim, unbroken effort with no real joy in it. That would be a lie, and I promised myself I would tell you the truth or nothing at all. Eli laughed. Eli teased me mercilessly about my terrible aim with a rifle and my tendency to burn the first pancake of every batch without fail. Eli danced with me, in his own stiff, careful way, at our children's weddings, spinning me slowly in the grass outside the reception tent, while our grandchildren laughed at how serious his face looked even while his feet were doing something almost playful. He loved deeply, and he loved well, and I do not want the story of his secret to overshadow the story of his love, because in the end, I have come to believe they were never 2 separate stories at all. They were the same story, told from 2 different angles. A man who is trying every day to be worthy of forgiveness he has never asked anyone to grant him will love with a particular intensity, a particular attentiveness that a man who has never had to fight for his own goodness might never fully understand. I benefited from that intensity every single day of our marriage, even when I did not know its source. Let me tell you now about the days after I first spoke with Katie Zook, because I skipped past them too quickly before, and I think what happened next matters just as much as the conversation in her kitchen. I did not simply drive home from Katie's farm and put the matter to rest. I found, in the weeks that followed, that I could not stop thinking about Fanny Zook, a woman I had never properly known, who had lived her whole widowed life with a suspicion she chose never to chase down. I found myself wanting to understand her better, the way you sometimes want to understand a person more fully after you learn something true about them, even if that person is already gone from this world. I asked Katie if she still had any of her grandmother's things, letters, a diary, anything that might help me understand the woman who had, in her own quiet way, extended a kind of grace to my husband without either of them ever speaking a word of it to each other. Katie brought out, on my 3rd visit to her farm, a small wooden box that had belonged to Fanny, containing a few photographs, some pressed flowers, and a handful of letters Fanny had written but never sent, addressed to no one in particular, the sort of letters some women write simply to organize their own grief on paper. Katie let me read 2 of them, with her permission, and I want to share a portion of what Fanny wrote, because I believe it belongs in this story as much as anything Eli himself wrote. In one letter, dated some 15 years after Amos's death, Fanny had written, in a careful, old-fashioned hand, about the strange comfort of unexplained kindness. She wrote that she had come to believe that grief, left alone long enough, sometimes finds its own way to healing through channels we do not fully understand or need to understand. That a mother does not always need a name attached to the hand that helps her, only the assurance that the world has not entirely forgotten her son. She wrote that she suspected, without proof, that someone who had loved Amos as much as she had was trying, in his own way, to keep a part of Amos alive through kindness to his family. And she wrote that she had decided, deliberately, prayerfully, not to unmask that person, because she believed some gifts are only fully gifts when they are allowed to remain anonymous, when the giver is permitted to give without needing recognition, without needing absolution spoken aloud. I sat in Katie's kitchen reading those words with tears running down my face, because I understood, finally, completely, that Fanny Zook and my husband had been engaged across 63 years, and without a single word passing directly between them, in a kind of silent conversation, a call and response of grief and grace that neither of them ever needed to complete out loud. Eli gave. Fanny received, and chose not to ask. And in that strange, quiet arrangement, both of them, I believe, found more peace than either might have found if the truth had been forced into the open decades earlier. This changed something in how I understood Eli's silence. I had spent the weeks right after his death wrestling with a hard question: whether his 63 years of quiet were a form of cowardice or a form of mercy, whether he owed Fanny the truth while she was alive to hear it, or whether some truths are better carried privately, expressed only through action, never through confession. I do not think I have a final answer to that question even now, and I am not sure anyone truly does. But I have come to believe that both things can be true at once. Eli's silence may have been in part a failure of courage, a boy's fear that never fully grew into a man's willingness to face consequences. And Eli's silence may also have been, in part, exactly the kind of gift Fanny Zook described in her letter, a form of loving her son's memory that did not require her to relive the worst afternoon of her life. I want to tell you about the conversation I had with our bishop, because I promised you I would, and because I think it matters for understanding how our community responded to a story that, in a place built so carefully around honesty and confession, might have been received very differently than it was. Our bishop, a man named Josiah Byler, had known Eli for over 40 years, had served alongside him during Eli's years as deacon, had eaten at our table more times than I could count. I went to him 3 weeks after my first visit to Katie Zook, uncertain of how our faith, which places such enormous weight on open confession before the church body, would judge a man who had carried an unconfessed sin silently for 63 years, using kindness as a private substitute for the public repentance our tradition usually expects. I sat in his small study, the same room where he had counseled 100 troubled marriages and grieving families over the decades, and I told him everything: the letter, the creek, Amos, Fanny, Katie, all of it. He was quiet for a long time after I finished, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion I had rarely heard from him in all our years of acquaintance. He told me that our tradition's emphasis on open confession exists not because God requires a public performance of shame, but because a community can only offer forgiveness to a wrong it knows about, and a person can only fully receive that forgiveness once they have stopped hiding from it. He said that Eli's sin, if we could even call it that, the frozen 30 seconds on a creek bank, was not, in his judgment, a moral failure so much as a human one. An entirely understandable response of a terrified child's body in the face of mortal danger, and that no bishop in our tradition, properly understanding that moment, would have required a formal confession or discipline for it, even if Eli had brought it forward the very next day. What troubled him more, he admitted honestly, was the 63 years of silence that followed. The decades during which Eli allowed a settled falsehood, however small, to stand uncorrected within the community's shared memory. But then, Bishop Byler said something that has stayed with me as much as anything Katie Zook said in her kitchen. He said, "Ruth, I have sat across from many men in this room over the years who confessed their sins loudly, publicly, dramatically, and then went home and changed almost nothing about how they lived. And I sat, for 40 years, across the table from a man who apparently confessed nothing at all, and yet who spent every single day of those 40 years quietly, invisibly building a life of restitution so thorough that I never once suspected he was carrying anything at all. I do not know which kind of repentance God weighs more heavily. I only know that if I had to choose, based on the fruit each one bears, I would choose Eli's kind every time. He told me that he did not believe the church needed to treat this as a matter requiring any formal response, that Eli had already answered for his failure 1,000 times over in ways that mattered more than words spoken before a congregation, and that my telling of the story now, freely, honestly, was itself a form of the confession Eli had never quite managed to give in life. He asked only that I share the story with gentleness, without turning Eli into either a villain or a saint, but simply into what he was, a man, fully human, fully flawed, and fully, deeply good in the ways that took him a lifetime to build. I want to tell you about the day, the following spring, when I finally told the full story to our whole extended family, gathered at our house for a Sunday dinner the way we do several times a year. All 6 of our children and their spouses, and every one of our grandchildren crowded around long tables set up across the porch and spilling into the yard. I had told each of our children privately by then, but I had not yet told the grandchildren, some of whom were old enough to understand, and I decided, after much prayer, that Eli's story deserved to be told to the whole family together, the way important family stories should be told, not whispered separately into individual ears, but spoken once, plainly into the middle of the whole gathered circle, so that everyone received the same version at the same time and could hold it together rather than apart. I remember my grandson Daniel, 16 years old that spring, exactly the age Eli had been on the creek bank, asking me quietly afterward whether I thought his grandfather had been a coward. I did not answer him quickly. I took him out to sit on the porch steps, the same steps where Eli once sat staring at a drought-stricken cornfield, and I told Daniel that I had asked myself the same question many times in the months since I read the letter, and that I had come to believe the answer mattered less than what a person does after the moment of failure, however it is judged. I told him that every human being alive will, at some point, freeze when they wish they had moved, will stay silent when they wish they had spoken, will fail some test they did not know they were being given until it was already over. I told him that the measure of a life is not whether such moments happen, because they happen to everyone, but what a person builds in all the days that follow. I told him his grandfather had failed once, for 30 seconds, at 16 years old, and had then spent the next 63 years, every single day of them, trying to become a man large enough to hold that failure without letting it define him, and that as far as I was concerned, having lived beside that effort for 41 years without even knowing its source, Eli Fisher was the least cowardly man I had ever known. Daniel thought about this for a long while, sitting beside me on those steps, And then he said something that made me weep all over again, though I have wept so many times over this story by now that I have nearly lost count. He said, "Then, I guess it isn't really a story about him being afraid at all, Mammy. It's a story about him deciding not to stay afraid." I have turned that sentence over in my mind almost every day since. I think my 16-year-old grandson understood something about his grandfather's life more clearly, in that one sentence, than I managed to understand across 41 years of marriage and one long, hard winter of grief afterward. I want to tell you, too, about what has happened to Katie Zook and me in the years since that first visit. Because I think it matters. And because I promised you at the start of this story that his last letter changed everything. And I want you to understand just how far that change has traveled. Katie and I have grown close in a way neither of us expected. We are separated in age by nearly 20 years, but grief and gratitude, it turns out, are a stronger bond between two women than age ever could be. We have taken to visiting one another every few weeks, sometimes simply to sit together over coffee and say very little at all, sometimes to talk for hours about our families, our faith, the strange winding ways that God, or fate, or simple human kindness carries stories forward across generations that never meant to be connected. Katie has told me that learning the full truth about Amos's death did not diminish her family's memory of him, as she had feared it might in the days after I first told her. Instead, she said, it made him more real to her than he had ever been before. A boy who was not simply a name spoken with careful sorrow at family gatherings, but an actual, living, laughing, reckless 17-year-old who had once dared his best friend to do something foolish and paid for it with his life. A boy whose death had rippled outward for 63 years in ways that touched a family he was never able to meet. My family. In kindnesses that outlasted his own short life by 6 decades and counting. 2 summers ago, Katie and I planted a small garden together at the edge of the creek, near the spot where, as best either of us can determine from old family stories, Amos went into the water that day. We did not mark it with a stone or a sign. Our people do not tend to do such things, preferring quiet remembrance to public memorial. But we planted flowers there, the same simple flowers that grow along every fence row in our county, and every summer since, Katie tells me. They come back on their own, spreading a little further along the bank each year, and she says she likes to think of them as belonging equally to Amos and to Eli. 2 boys bound together by one terrible afternoon and by 63 years of a debt that was. Never fully spoken, but was, in the end, I believe, fully paid. I want to close this part of the story by telling you what I have learned in these years since I first opened that letter at my kitchen table about the nature of the secrets we carry and the letters we leave behind and the people we believe we know completely. Because I think this understanding is the true gift Eli left me. Larger even than the reconciliation with the Zook family. Larger even than the peace I eventually found with the harder parts of his silence. I have learned that loving someone completely does not mean knowing every single thing about them. I spent 41 years believing that complete love required complete knowledge, that any hidden room in my husband's heart represented a failure of intimacy between us, a distance I should have closed, but somehow never noticed. I do not believe that anymore. I have come to believe that every person carries at least one locked room, one memory or fear or shame too heavy to hand to another person, even a beloved spouse, even after decades of trust. And that the presence of that room does not mean a marriage has failed to achieve true closeness. It only means that human beings are, all of us, larger and more mysterious than even our closest loves can fully hold. And that the humility to accept this, rather than resent it, may be one of the deepest forms of love there is. I have learned, too, that the goodness we witness in the people we love is very rarely the whole story, and that understanding its true cost, when we are finally permitted to see it, does not diminish that goodness, but deepens it beyond anything we could have imagined while it was still hidden from us. I loved Eli Fisher as a good man for 41 years. I love him now, having learned the truth, as something far greater than merely a good man. I love him as a man who built goodness, deliberately, painstakingly, out of the wreckage of his own worst moment, who turned 63 years of private shame into 63 years of private grace, who never once asked to be thanked for it, never once asked even to be forgiven for it by the people he was quietly helping, and who, in the end, trusted me, and only me, with the whole truth of who he really was, even if he could only manage to hand it to me on paper, in a shaking hand, 3 days before he died. There is one more part of this story I have been saving, because I was not sure, when I began speaking to you tonight, whether I would have the courage to include it. And I think that is fitting, in its own way, since courage, or the slow, hard building of it, has turned out to be the true subject of everything I have told you so far. About a year after Eli's death, I received a letter of my own, unexpected, from a woman I had never met. A woman named Verna, who had grown up 2 districts over from ours, and who had, as it happened, been a girlhood friend of Amos Zook's older sister. Katie had mentioned my visits to her, in the way that news travels in our communities, quietly from kitchen to kitchen, and Verna had written to me after hearing, secondhand, some small part of the story. Her letter was short, only a page, but I want to tell you what it said, because I think it adds one more piece to a puzzle I believed, by then, was already complete. Verna wrote that she remembered, as a girl of about 14 at the time, the funeral for Amos Zook, and she remembered, more particularly, a detail that had stayed with her for 60-some years, without her ever quite understanding why it mattered. She wrote that she remembered Eli Fisher, then 16 years old, standing at the very back of the crowd at that funeral, refusing to come forward when the other boys his age went up to view the body and pay their respects. And she remembered that his own mother had to half drag him forward, and that when he finally stood beside the casket, he did not weep the way the other boys wept. He stood, she wrote, entirely still, entirely silent, staring down at his friend's face, with an expression she had never forgotten, though she had never had the words for it until now, reading of Eli's letter secondhand, and finally understanding what she had witnessed as a girl. She wrote that she had always assumed, over the decades, that Eli's strange stillness at that funeral was simply a boy's private grief, awkward and unpracticed, but that she understood now it had been something else entirely, a boy standing beside a grave he believed, in some sense, belonged partly to him too. I do not share this letter with you to add more sorrow onto a story that already carries a great deal of it. I share it because of what Verna wrote in her closing lines, which I think brings a kind of grace to this story that even I had not fully arrived at on my own. She wrote that she hoped I would not think less of Eli for what she remembered, but that she hoped, instead, I would understand it as evidence of just how young, how truly young, both boys had been that summer. 16 and 17, ages we sometimes forget, looking back from the far side of a long life, are barely more than children. She wrote that she had raised 5 sons of her own since then, and had watched each of them at 16 and 17 do foolish, reckless, occasionally dangerous things, the way all young people do. testing the edges of the world before they understand how sharp those edges truly are. And she wrote that she did not believe any bishop, any parent, any God worth believing in would hold a frightened 16-year-old boy responsible, in the deepest sense, for failing to do what even a grown man might have failed to do, standing on that same bank, facing that same current. She said the real miracle of the story, as she understood it, was not that Eli failed once at 16, but that he never stopped trying to make up for it, every day, for the rest of his whole long life. I think about Verna's letter often, especially on the hard nights. And there are still hard nights, even all these years later, when the house is quiet and I reach across the bed out of old habit before I remember, freshly, painfully, that there is no one there to reach for anymore. On those nights, I take out Eli's letter, the original 4 pages, worn soft now at the folds, from how many times I have opened and closed it, and I read it again, and I find that it means something slightly different to me each time, the way Scripture does, the way the good stories always do, revealing a little more of themselves the more life you bring to the reading of them. I want to tell you, too, about my own faith, and how this whole long ordeal changed it, because I do not think I have been honest with you if I let you believe I emerged from this story with my beliefs entirely unshaken. I did not. I have wrestled, in these years since, with hard questions I never expected to face at my age. Questions I thought I had settled decades ago, as a young wife sitting in Sunday service beside a husband I believed I understood completely. I have wrestled with what it means that a good man could carry a hidden sorrow through decades of worship, decades of confession services where other members of our church stood and spoke their failures aloud, decades of communion taken with a silence sitting unspoken beneath his tongue. I have wrestled with whether our way of doing things, our emphasis on the visible spoken confession, sometimes misses the deeper, quieter confessions a person makes with their whole life instead of their words. I do not think I have fully resolved these questions even now, and I am not sure a person is meant to fully resolve questions of this size before their own time on earth runs out. But I have come to a kind of peace with the not knowing, a peace I did not have in the first hard months after the letter, and I think that peace, more than any tidy answer, is what faith is actually for. I have also come to understand my own younger self a little differently, looking back through the lens of everything I have learned. I remember, now, small moments across our marriage that I had filed away as simply Eli's particular quietness, moments I understand differently now. I remember him excusing himself from more than one confession service over the years, claiming a headache, a stomach complaint, some small physical excuse that always seemed at the time perfectly ordinary, but which I now suspect was simply a man who could not sit through an hour of watching other people find the courage he could not find in himself. I remember him being unusually generous, almost uncomfortably so, whenever a young person in our district got into some kind of trouble, a boy caught drinking, a girl who strayed during her Rumspringa years, always the first to argue for patience, for gentleness, for remembering that young people make mistakes that do not have to define the whole of their lives. I understand now that he was not simply being kind in those moments. He was, in some sense, pleading his own case, quietly, through the mercy he extended to others, hoping perhaps that if enough grace flowed outward from him, some of it might eventually flow back in his own direction. Even if only in the silence of his own heart, since he could never bring himself to ask for it directly. I think, too, about what I want my own children and grandchildren to carry forward from this story, because I am an old woman now, 81 years old as I sit here telling you all of this. And I know, better than most, that my own time in this world is growing shorter, and I have thought a great deal about what kind of letter I might want to leave behind, and whether I have any locked rooms of my own that deserve, before I go, to finally be opened. I will tell you honestly that I do not believe I carry a secret of the size and weight that Eli carried. I have lived, by comparison, a fairly plain and visible life. My failures ordinary ones. Moments of impatience with my children. Small vanities. Small resentments. The usual accumulated weight of 81 years of being an imperfect human being, trying her best. But I have decided, because of everything Eli's letter taught me, that I do not want to wait until my own final days to say the things that matter. The way he was forced to wait. The way his courage only found him when there was no time left to act on what it revealed. I have begun, in these last years, to say things out loud to my children and grandchildren that I might once have kept to myself, out of our community's usual reserve. I tell them I am proud of them, plainly, without waiting for a special occasion. I tell them when I am afraid, of growing older, of losing my memory, of the day when I too will not be here to answer their questions. I have decided that Eli's greatest gift to me, in the end, larger even than the reconciliation with the Zook family, was teaching me, through the example of his own hard-won and long-delayed courage, to spend whatever years I have left refusing to let my own truths wait for a deathbed letter. I think of him every single day. Still, all these years later, I think of him when I light the stove in the morning, remembering how he always rose first so I would not wake to cold. I think of him when I pass the old covered bridge on my way to visit Katie Zook, and I always slow the buggy a little as I cross it, though I could not tell you exactly why, except that it feels like the right thing to do. A small, silent acknowledgement of everything that Creek carried away, and everything it eventually, so many years later, helped bring back together. I think of him every time one of our grandchildren does something reckless and brave, the way Amos once did, wading into water they have been told to stay out of, and I feel, in those moments, a strange double tenderness. Fear for the child in front of me, and a kind of ancient grief for a boy I never met, who might have grown old himself, might have had grandchildren of his own doing reckless, brave, foolish things, if a summer storm 63 years ago had gone even slightly differently. I do not know, in the end, whether Eli deserved the forgiveness he spent his whole life trying to earn without ever directly asking for it. I am not sure that is a question any of us are equipped to answer about another human soul, even one we loved as completely as I loved my husband. But I know this. I know that a 16-year-old boy froze on a creek bank one summer afternoon, and that a 79-year-old man died, 63 years later, in a hospital bed, having spent every single one of those years trying to become someone worthy of a rescue he had failed to attempt. I know that his final act on this earth was not to protect his own reputation, which he could easily have done by taking his secret quietly into the ground, the way he had carried it for so long, but to risk it, to hand me a truth that could have changed how I remembered him, because he believed, in the end, that a woman named Fanny Zook deserved the choice of knowing, even if he could not find it in himself to give her that choice while she still lived. That, to me, is not the story of a coward. That is the story of a man who spent his whole life climbing, slowly, painfully, one quiet kindness at a time, out of a hole he fell into as a frightened child, and who very nearly, at the very last possible moment, made it all the way out before the climb finally ended. I want to tell you about one more gathering before I finish, because I think it belongs here, At the very end, more than anywhere else I could have placed it. Every few weeks, a group of us widows from our district meet at one another's homes, taking turns hosting, bringing quilting or mending to work on while we talk, the way women have done in our communities for longer than any of us can remember. There are 7 of us now, ranging in age from 68 to 86. All of us having buried husbands after decades of marriage. All of us learning, in our different ways, how to build a life around an absence that never fully stops being strange, no matter how many years pass. I did not tell them about Eli's letter right away. I waited nearly 2 years, working up my courage slowly the way I suppose Eli himself once had to work up his, though my courage had far less at stake than his ever did. When I finally told them, sitting in Anna Mae Stoltzfus's front room on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, quilting needles going still in every hand around the circle as I spoke, I watched something remarkable happen. One by one, as I finished, the other women began to share pieces of their own husbands' hidden sorrows, things they had never spoken aloud even to each other in all our years of gathering together. Anna Mae told us her husband had struggled for decades with a private grief over a stillborn son who came before any of their living children, a grief he carried so quietly that even Anna Mae had not fully understood its depth until his final years, when he began, unprompted, to visit the child's small grave every week without ever telling her why. Rebecca told us her husband had once, as a young man, nearly left our faith entirely during his Rumspringa, had gone so far as to buy a bus ticket to a city 3 states away before turning back at the very last hour, a fact he did not tell her until they had already been married 20 years, and which he confessed to her only because their own son was, at the time, going through the same restless searching, and Rebecca's husband wanted her to understand why he was arguing for patience rather than alarm. I share this with you not to suggest that every marriage hides a secret as large as Eli's. I do not believe that is true, and I would not want you to walk away from this story suspicious of every quiet moment in your own marriage, searching for locked doors that may not exist at all. I share it because I think there is something universal in what happened in that front room that Tuesday afternoon. Something about how one person's honesty, however hard-won, however delayed, gives permission for other people's honesty to finally surface as well. Eli's letter did not just change how I understood my own marriage. It changed, in some smaller way, how 6 other women in that room came to understand theirs, and I suspect, though I cannot know this for certain, that it has changed things further still. Rippling outward the way Eli's quiet kindnesses once rippled outward toward the Zook family, reaching people neither of us will ever meet or know about. I think this is, in the end, the truest reason I decided to tell this story to all of you tonight. Strangers scattered across however many countries and towns and quiet evenings you are watching this from. I do not know what any of you are carrying. I do not know what creek bank you may be standing beside in your own memory, what 30 seconds you wish you could take back, what letter you have been meaning to write and have not yet found the courage for. But I know, now, in a way I did not know before Eli's death, that these locked rooms are far more common than any of us like to admit, that nearly every person walking through this life is carrying something they believe makes them unworthy of the love they are nonetheless receiving. And I know that the telling of it, however late, however imperfect, however much it costs, tends to open doors far wider than we expect. Doors that let in not judgment as we fear, but a deeper, truer, more durable kind of love than we ever thought ourselves capable of receiving. Eli Fisher was my husband for 41 years. He gave me 6 children, A lifetime of quiet mornings and hard winters and small, faithful kindnesses. A love so steady I mistook it, for most of my life, for simplicity, when it was in fact the opposite. A love built with tremendous, invisible effort, out of the wreckage of a boy's worst afternoon. Sustained across 63 years by nothing but his own private determination to become worthy of a rescue he had failed to make. He gave me, in the very end, one last gift I did not know to ask for, and was not sure, in the first raw weeks, that I even wanted. The whole and complete truth of who he really was, handed to me on 4 trembling pages. Because he trusted me, even from beyond the grave, to carry it forward with more grace than he had ever quite believed he deserved himself. I have tried, in these years since, to be worthy of that trust. I hope, in the telling of this story tonight, that I have honored him the way he asked me to, not by hiding his failure, and not by dwelling on it either, but by placing it where it belongs. As one small, terrible afternoon inside a whole long life of quiet, determined goodness. A life that in the end taught an old woman like me more about what love actually costs and what forgiveness actually looks like than 81 years of sermons ever managed to teach me on their own. People sometimes ask me, when I share pieces of this story in person, whether I ever wished Eli had simply taken his secret to the grave, whether life might have been easier, simpler, gentler, if Sarah had never handed me that envelope, if I had gone on believing, undisturbed, in the simpler version of my husband I had carried for 41 years. I have thought about this question honestly, turned it over many times on quiet evenings, and I want to answer it truthfully for you now, because I think it matters more than almost anything else I have told you tonight. I do not wish that. Not for one single day. I understand why the question gets asked, because there is a kind of peace in ignorance that I do not want to pretend does not exist. The 41 years I spent believing I had married an uncomplicated good man were, in their own way, sweet years, and I do not regret having lived them in that particular innocence, because I do not believe Eli was wrong to protect me from that weight, while he still could carry it himself. But the years since the letter, harder as they have been in some ways, have given me something the earlier years never could. A love for my husband that includes the whole of him, not just the parts that were easy to love. I have come to believe that the love we offer to a person's easy, visible goodness is a real love, a true love, but it is not yet the deepest love available to us. The deepest love, I have learned, is the love that can look at a person's worst 30 seconds, their most frightened, most human, most unheroic moment, and choose, even then, especially then, to hold that person closer rather than further away. I was not given the chance to offer Eli that deepest kind of love while he was alive, because he could not bring himself to receive it from me until it was almost too late. But I have been given the chance to offer it to his memory in these years since, and I have come to believe that this, too, counts for something. That love offered even after death still travels somewhere, still matters, still completes something that was left unfinished. I think, too, about what I would say to Eli now. If I had one more evening with him, one more hour at our kitchen table before he had to go. I have imagined this conversation many times, lying awake in the quiet house that used to hold 6 children and now holds only me and the sound of the clock on the mantel. I think I would tell him that I forgive him, not for the 30 seconds on the creek bank, which I do not believe ever needed my forgiveness in the first place, being, as I have come to understand it, simply the involuntary response of a terrified child's body to mortal danger, but for the 63 years of silence that followed, for the decades he spent believing I could not have loved him through the whole truth. For the years he denied me the chance to help carry a weight I would have gladly shared the moment he first let me see it. I think I would tell him that his kindness, his patience, his gentleness across our whole marriage, none of it needed to be earned in the way he believed it did. That I would have loved him exactly the same. Perhaps even more fiercely, had I known from the very beginning about the frightened boy underneath the careful, watchful man. I think, most of all, I would tell him thank you for finally trusting me at the very end, for choosing, even with his courage failing him right up to the final week, to open that locked door rather than let it stay sealed forever. Because in opening it, he gave me not only the truth of who he was, but the truth of what our whole marriage had actually been built from. And I would not trade that fuller, harder, truer understanding for all the comfortable years of simpler belief that came before it. If there is one thing I hope you carry away from this story tonight, whoever you are, wherever in this world you are sitting, as you listen to an old woman talk about a creek and a letter, and a husband who spent 63 years trying to become brave, I hope it is this. Whatever locked room you may be carrying, whatever 30 seconds you wish you could take back, whatever letter you have been meaning to write and have kept folded in a drawer out of fear, I hope you find the courage to open that door sooner than Eli did, sooner than his last failing week of life. Not because the people you love cannot bear the truth of you, but because, as I learned in that kitchen with Katie Zook, as I learned from Fanny Zook's own unsent letters, as I learned from 6 other widows sitting in a quilting circle finally telling their own long-buried stories, the truth, however hard, however late, tends to travel further and land more gently than we ever expect it to. It found its way, in the end, from a creek bank 63 years ago, through a hospital room, through a folded letter, through my own trembling hands at a kitchen table, all the way to a woman named Katie Zook, who received it not as a wound but as a gift. And now, tonight, all the way to you. Eli's grave sits behind our meeting house, a plain stone, no different from any other in that quiet field. Because that is our way. We do not raise ourselves up in death any more than we do in life. But I know what lies beneath that stone now in a way I did not know it on the day we buried him. I know a boy who was afraid. I know a man who spent 63 years trying to become brave after the fact, in every quiet, unseen way a life allows. I know a husband who loved me completely and could not, until the very end, find the courage to let me love the whole truth of him while he was still alive to feel it. And I have come, in these last years of my own life, to believe that this is not a story about a secret at all. It is a story about what love is actually made of. Not the easy parts, the frost cleared from a window, the hand reaching for yours across a supper table, though those parts matter too. But the harder, deeper parts, the decades of trying, the quiet acts no one sees, the courage it takes, even once, even only in a letter, even only at the very end, to finally open a locked door and let someone else stand inside the fullness of who you really are. If Eli's story has meant anything to you tonight, if it has made you think of someone you loved and thought you knew completely, or a secret of your own that you have been carrying alone, I would be honored if you would share it with me in the comments below, along with, as I asked you at the very start, the place in this wide world you are joining me from tonight. I read every word you leave me, and I promise you, An old Amish widow sitting at her kitchen table has more time to read than you might think. And if this story has touched you even a little, please take a moment now to like this video and to subscribe to this channel so that you do not miss the next story I have to tell, because I have learned in these last years of my life that I am not finished telling them yet. Thank you for sitting with me tonight and for letting an old woman's husband finally be fully known. Rest well, wherever you are watching from, and I will see you in the next story.